Well, hello, namaste, and Hare Krishna. Welcome to talk number 6. And this talk is about Brahman as Narayana. If you've been with us since the beginning, you'll know that we've made a logical logical progression through the different stages of progress in the logical argument, the logical reasoning, leading us to Krishna, or the Supreme Person. Last time, the previous occasions, we talked about the senses being inadequate receivers for absolute truth. We talked about the Vedas. We talked about the Upanishads giving special information from the Vedas. And last time we talked about Brahman. And we talked about Brahman as the creator, this divine source of everything. Brahman means the great, Briha, the great, the ever-expanding. And Brahman is described in many parts of the Upanishads as the source, that from which everything comes, that by which everything is sustained, and that to which everything returns in the future. He's the creator, the originator, the adhara, the foundation of reality, and the dissolver of the universe. Imagine that. Then we talked a little bit about the Isha principle. Ishavasyamidam sarvam yadkidjam jagatjam jagad. That the first verse of the Isha Upanishad, being the Upanishad dealing with Isha, explains that not only is this Brahman the source, the control, the source, the foundation, and the dissolver, but also the controller. Brahman is the controller. What that means is that although we interpret our actions as coming from our own volition, we are very much controlled. Everything in this world is very much owned and controlled. There's two points there. So Brahman is the source, Brahman is the foundation, Brahman is the dissolution. And that leads into Brahman being the controller of everything. If everything comes from a source, then the source controls that and owns it. It belongs to it. So our controller and the controller of everything, both matter and spirit, which is extended from that source, is subject to the control of the antaryami, the inner witness. There's a conscience inside you that knows whether you're doing something right or wrong. We call that our conscience. But it's actually God who is even beyond that conscience, telling us. On the inside, he's known as Antaryami, or the inner witness who witnesses everything. And on the outside, Upadrashta, who sees everything. So inside of you, outside of you, he's constantly there. This is Brahman. We talked about Brahman being the soul of the universe. Just like you have a body and you have a soul. Or rather, you don't have a soul. The soul has you. The soul is you. And the soul has a body. So the universe also has a body, which is made of matter. And it's the constellations, it's the star systems, the galaxies, the moon, the earth, Mars, everything. That is the body of the soul of the universe, which is Brahman. Then we talked about how Brahman is conscious, aware, and is super conscious of everything. And our individual consciousness fits inside that superconsciousness. So we are a part of that. So there is a superconsciousness, which is Brahman, and we are part of that superconsciousness. We call that individual consciousness and superconsciousness. They are related, but one is dependent on the other. And perhaps we mention another verse from the Upanishads. Nitya nityanam chetanas chetananam eko yobo hudidati kaman. That there is one eternal amongst many eternals, and all those numerous eternals are dependent on the one eternal. That is the relationship of the individual consciousness, the individual jiva, the individual Brahman, to the super Brahman. So we talked about the ultimate reality being the highest state of existence, containing no material elements, but streaming out matter. So the Supreme Spirit streams out matter, and this makes matter an attribute of that Brahman. So there's an interesting discussion about attributes, and we're coming to that. Brahman is also the God of religion, if you like. When we say God, we're talking about this Supreme Brahman. And we'll get to the personality of Godhead by the end of this talk, I promise you. So an attribute. When we talk about the English word attribute, Sanskrit vishesha. An attribute is a quality, I'll read it, a quality or feature regarded as a characteristic or inherent part of someone or something. So attributes are very important. Just as you have a lotus flower, a beautiful fragrance, and you have pinkness, the attribute is the pinkness and the fragrance. But the fragrance by itself is not the flower. The pinkness by itself is not the flower. Those are both attributes of the total flower. So a flower has those attributes of being pink if it's a pink lotus, blue if it's a blue lotus, and a beautiful fragrance. So attributes and owner of the attributes. Similarly, if you have a candle flame, you have heat and light. These are attributes of the flame. They exist simultaneously, but one comes from the other. The heat and the light come from the flame. The flame does not come from the heat and the light. One is the substance and the other are the attributes. So similarly, although Brahman is infinite and indivisible, you can't cut it into slices. It's not like pizza. You can't take a pizza slicer and cut it up. It's infinite. You never get to the end. It's one. Even though it's one and it's infinite, still it has the power to extend itself. So Brahman is the substance, and the extensions to Brahman are its inherent attributes. This is an important thing. So then we go to a book called the Vishnu Purana, and in the Vishnu Purana we have this quote, very nice one. Just as the illumination of fire situated in one place is spread all over, the energies of the Supreme Brahman are spread throughout the universe. Vishnu Purana, chapter 1, section 1, chapter 22, verse 53. That's a very, I think this is Parasha Shakti Vividaya Shriyate. Or is it? Perhaps not. But it's a very important verse from the Vishnu Purana to show the relationship between Brahman and its attributes. And that the attributes of Brahman are spread throughout the universe. Now, You and I have presumably grown up in the Western world where there were no competitors for God in the same way as you get in the Eastern world. If you grew up believing in angels, then angels had a place in the hierarchy. But in the Eastern world, there are many quarter gods and half gods and three-quarter gods and full God. So what is Brahman in relation to them? Well, you would presume that they are all attributes, and you'd be right. So in the Vedas, there are many devas or demigods, half gods, and they're referred to by name. And the Upanishads, they say that we should understand the relationship between these gods, who are attributes of Brahman, and Brahman itself. So there's a conversation, nice conversation, the Brihad Anyaraka, Aranyaka Upanishad, chapter 3, section 9. And the sage Sakalya, he asks Yajnavalkya, very important sage, how many gods are there? Now you will have heard perhaps that Hinduism has millions of gods or thousands of gods, but therefore this question is very important for us. How many gods are there? So Yajnavalkya, first of all, he replies with large numbers. 3,003 gods, he says there are. And then the next verse, he gets asked the same question, how many gods are there? He says 303. And then he asks the same question. Sakalya asks the same question. And he said, actually, there are 33. Then he says, there are 6 gods altogether. Okay? So then he asks the question again, Sakalya. He says, well, actually, there are 3 gods. He says, well, actually, there are only 2 gods. He says, well, actually, there's only 1 God. And he concludes that there's only one supreme. So the dialogue is part of a much larger philosophical discussion about the nature of reality. But again, it's another way of approaching the ultimate reality by saying that all the other gods, which are real, their existence is based on the Supreme Brahman. So far we've just heard the name of Brahman, and there are many verses in the Upanishads to help us to understand the difference between Brahman and matter, and the verses are there to help us to break away from the Vedas and have some philosophical understanding, because the Vedas mainly speak of elevation to heavenly planets after this world, how not to reincarnate. How not to reincarnate in a bad karma life, how to have a good karma life the next time round. But the Upanishads, they begin with the point that, well, actually, you're short-sighted if you do that. So, in the Rig Veda, we only have the name of Vishnu 5 times. But when Vishnu is mentioned in the Upanishads, he's described as superior to other gods. So we go to the Mudgala Upanishad and we find that although the statements don't necessarily confirm Vishnu's identity with Brahman, they point in that direction. Everything is cryptic. So Brahman has many names in the Vedas, including some names that are personal and some names that are more like the god of a traditional religion, the traditional religions that came after. But if we look in the Rig Veda, we'll find a portion called the Purusha Sukta, in which Brahman is known as Purusha. And it's from the 10th mandala of the Rig Veda. And in Sanskrit, you have people who've written dictionaries. There's a famous dictionary called the Nirukti Dictionary, But there's another Vedic etymologist, Yaska, who says in the Nirukti dictionary that Purusha is made of two root words, pru, which means all or everything or infinite, and usha, sustain, pervade, etc. Hence Purusha means the all-pervading one, which is another name of Isha, mentioned in the Isha Upanishad. Isha or Ishvara or God. So, although Brahman has different names, in some parts of the Vedas, namely the Upanishads, and later on we find those names coming together. So you'll find Isha, Brahman, Antaryami, Narayana, Vishnu, and ultimately, Purusha, etc. There's another set of literature called the Pancharatra. There's a book known as the Irreducible Samhita, which comes from Lord Shiva. So it says that the Purusha Sukta is found in all four Vedas and is therefore a text of great authority. This is what the Ahirbuddhya Samhita says. So the Purusha Sukta begins, Om Sahasrashirsha Purusha Sahasraksha Sahasrapada Sabamim Vishvato Vratva Atyadishtadashangulam Purusha Evedam Sarvam Yat Bhutam Yat Shabhavyam Utam Ritatvasyeshana Hirannena Tirohati Hetavannasya Mahimato Jayagangsha Purusha Parusya Vishvabhutani Tripadasyam Ritam Divihi. So those words are at the very least 100,000 years old, and they are describing the Supreme who played a role in the beginning of the universe as Purusha Sukta. So then the Narayana Upanishad states that the Purusha, the person who's identified in the Purusha Sukta, is Narayana. And the Taittiriya Narayana Upanishad states that the Purusha of the Rig Veda is Narayana. So here we have scriptures, ancient texts, which say Brahman is Purusha and Purusha is Narayana. And another hymn appears in the Yajurveda, in the Mahanarayana Upanishad, which says as follows: Narayana is the supreme Brahman. Narayana is the supreme reality. Narayana is the supreme light. Narayana is the supreme self. Narayana is the most excellent meditation. This is the Narayana Suktam in the Yajurveda. So Narayan is another name of Vishnu, and it's clear from the Vishnu Gayatri of the Narayana Suktam, which occurs in the 10th Prapataka of the Taittiriya Aranyaka in the Krishna Ayurveda, which says, so now we've gone from Brahman to Purusha, Purusha to Narayan, and Narayan to Vasudeva and Vishnu. Om Narayanaya Vidmahe Vasudevaya Dhimahi Tanno Vishnu Prachodayada. So we find that these are different epithets of the Supreme Brahman. We meditate upon Narayan, this is the translation. For that we devote ourselves to Vasudeva. May that Vishnu invigorate us. So in this way, I hope you see that we've got all these names, all these epithets, sort of becoming focused as in a magnifying glass, all being focused on this Vishnu. So regarding the name Vishnu, the Shatapatha Brahmana states that yajna is Vishnu, the very act of sacrifice, the very act of detaching oneself from the world and connecting to a higher world. That in itself, that activity is Vishnu. Vishnu also means the sustainer, according to Yaska. And Yaska, he's our etymologist, remember? Very cleverly, he says that Vishnu is made of Vishva, which is the entire, the whole, and Nuha, which means to pervade. So Vishvanuha, Vishnu, means to pervade everything. He who pervades everything. Hence, Vishnu and Purusha are the same in context. So, Taittiriya Upanishad says that Maha is Brahman, all the other are Devas. Narayana is that Brahman, all are created by him, and all are Angas. So no other deity is described in the same way in the Rig Veda. We have a lot of names in the Rig Veda. And ultimately the Aitareya Brahmana states, Agnirvai Devana Mavamo Vishnu Parama Tadantara Sarvadevata. Agni is the lowest god, Vishnu is the highest. All other gods occupy positions that are in between. That's the first section, first chapter, first verse of the Aitareya Brahmana. So in that book, it's very important to get it over to the reader or to the listener that I'm going to tell you this. Agni is the lowest, Vishnu is the highest, everyone else is in between. Okay. So thank you for listening so far. We are well on the way. There's another body of evidence to consider in our search for the absolute truth, and to confirm that our interest in Krishna consciousness is not just sentimental or not just a fashion, but it's actually based on really substantial knowledge. There's a group of literatures known as agamas. Agamas, the religious books aimed at talking about modes of worship. The word gam with the proposition agam, means to move towards an object. They're also known, the agamas collectively, they're also known as tantra. And don't get confused. Tantra means, of course, different things to different people, but tantra, the word tan means to spread, and tra means to save the person, means to free oneself from bondage, triety. So tan actually means a yarn, a strand, or a fiber. Tan. And it's present in the word tantu naba. Naba means the belly button. So what could be a tantu naba? Well, it's a person that has a belly button from which is coming string or strand or yarn. What is that? So the Sanskrit word for spider is tantunaba. Tantunaba. A strand belly. And a spider's web is therefore known as a strand net or tantujala. Tantujala. And a weaver of cloth, someone who weaves cloth from strands, is known as a tanduvaya. So if you meet a weaver, you can know the etymological connections between the weaver and a spider. So the word tra, the suffix, means protector or defender. So tantra is therefore coded scriptures when several elements of something are woven together to make them greater, a greater version of the original. So there are Vishnu-centered tantras, and people who follow those tantras are known as Vaishnavas. So that is, perhaps some of you are followers of the Vaishnav tantras. So Pancharatra is part of the Agamas. It's a Vaishnav tantra, and it was spoken by Lord Narayana. So now we have this idea, and I hope it's not too much of a jump for you, that the person Narayana is speaking to some devas and demigods over 5 nights. Pancharatra, 5 nights. Lord Shiva, Lakshmi, Narada Muni, and the 4 Kumaras. Pancharatra is also mentioned in the Mahabharata and, of course, in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And our great king of philosophers, Jiva Goswami, in the medieval times. He was in the late 1500s, early 1600s. He wrote in his sort of magnum opus, the Paramatma Sandarbha. He writes as follows: seeing that the imperfect scriptures and the modes of passion and ignorance bring only a host of troubles, and also seeing that the original Vedas are very difficult to follow properly, and thus being dissatisfied with both of these, the all-knowing scripture authors affirm the superiority of the Pancharatras, which describe the pure absolute truth, Narayana, and the worship of the Lord, which is easy to perform. So the Pancharatra texts are no shorter than the Vedas, they're very long, but the worship is slightly simpler, and it makes for an easier performance. So what does it say in the Mahabharata? Well, Mahabharata we know is from the time of Krishna. We don't know anything about Krishna yet. We don't jump to conclusions. Krishna has not been identified as God yet. Not by me, anyway. We're still talking about Brahman, but we know that in the olden days, 5,000 years ago, Mahabharata was already talking about something that was old. And the old thing that it was talking about was Pancharatra. Mahabharata says that Pancharatra is an ancient system. So 5,000 years ago, Pancharatra was being described as an ancient system. And worship of Vishnu is the exclusive means to salvation in the Pancharatra. There's two types of Vaishnava Agama. One is called Vaikanasa, and the other is called Pancharatra. Vaikanasa says that Vishnu is Narayana, and then this establishes that they're both the same. And from Pancharatra, which we now know is authoritative, we get the 6 principal attributes of God, or Shadguna. So here we go again. Here's some more attributes that should be interesting for us, because we are seekers after light. We're seekers after the absolute truth, the ultimate reality. Shadguna. So that we find daily worship, 5-fold daily religious observances, and many other things. So from all these pramanas or evidences, Brahman, Purusha, Narayana, Vishnu are epithets for the same Supreme Being. What concerns us now is whether the Supreme is personal or impersonal. And at first, as we talked about last week, it's easy to conceive that the Supreme must somehow be impersonal because we've never seen him, if he is a him or a her or an it. But when we talk about Brahman as a abstract conception, it's much easier to think that God is something, but I'm not sure what, but I'm sure he's not like this, I'm sure he's not like that. The imagination can never stretch to encompass the personhood of God. Nevertheless, we must say that if you are a person, if you have consciousness, then it must mean that the Brahman is conscious and self-conscious. It's not that God is not aware that he's God. He knows that he's God. He knows his own existence. It's not that just because you have compassion, there's no compassion in God. If you have love and the capacity to love and the desire to be loved, surely if those are attributes of a supreme source, then in that source you will find compassion and love. So the great philosopher Vedanta Deshika, he synthesizes his opinion from all of that, and he says, the Supreme Being, he says, is Sarva Vyapi, is all-pervading. Antaratma, immanent in all beings as an inner controller. Adhara, the foundation of all existence, means the cause of all causes and the foundation of it, everything that we see. And then finally, Sarveshwara, the controller of the universe. So, we talked a little bit about the Mahabharata and the identity of Vishnu with Vasudeva, Narayan, Bhagavan, and Krishna. This is interesting because in the Mahabharata we do find that Krishna is identified with Vasudeva, Vasudeva is identified with Vishnu, Vishnu is identified with Narayan, and Narayan is identified with the Supreme Brahman. So all of that together, these different epithets come together in the Mahabharata, and it focuses, and of course what does it focus on? It focuses on that episode in the just before the Battle of Kurukshetra, which we call the Bhagavad Gita. We'll return to that. But it's brought out emphatically in the Bhagavad Gita. 700 verses which are found in the chapters 23 to 40 of the Bhishma Parva of the Mahabharata. So when I give these talks, of course, they're very highly condensed, something to be studied as homework afterwards. I hope some of you are doing that. But let's just now conclude. We have Narayana as the Supreme Brahman from the Taittiriya Upanishads. We have the Narayana Sukta. We have Yajurveda describing Narayana as the absolute reality, and the abode of that person, Narayana, as the Paramam Padam. Om Tad Vishnu Paramam Padam Sada Pashanti Surayo Devi Chakshuratatam Tad Vipraso Vipanivo Jagravangsa Samindade Vishnu Yat Paramam Padam. That Vishnu's abode is the Paramapadam, the highest place. And the greatly enlightened ones, the yogis, are always straining their vision to see this highest abode of Vishnu. We also have Sahasrashirsham Devam, Vishraksham, Vishwashambhuvam, Vishram Narayanam Devam, Aksharam Paramam Padam, meaning the Lord with 1,000 heads, the one with all-pervading eyes, the foundation of everything, Narayan, the eternal being, the imperishable, supreme position. Okay, so there we have the name Narayan being used. That's why you'll get different names. We talked about the Mudgala Upanishad, which identifies the Purusha of the Purusha Sukta as being Vishnu or Narayan, portraying him as the primordial cosmic person and the cause of everything. We have the Mahanarayan Upanishad, which says, Eko Havai Narayana Asin. In the beginning there was only Narayan, with no Brahma and no Shiva. So there's no competition. Shiva was not there, Brahma was not there. Brahman was there because Brahman is Narayan, but not Brahma, someone else. And of course in the Bhagavat Purana, the Srimad Bhagavatam, we have the very beginning shloka, Janmadyasya yata navayad taratashrateshvara vigyasvarad. We have that which we're going to discuss in this book is the supreme, from which everything comes, from whom everything comes. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. His name is Vasudeva. So the Bhagavatam begins with that point and then continues, and then we'll have everything. Narayan, Vishnu, Krishna, everything is explained in the pages of the Bhagavatam. From the Maha Upanishad, we have further confirmation that Narayan is the source of all beings. And then, of course, we come to Bhagavad Gita. Now, all of this funnels into the Mahabharata, all of the Mahabharata funnels into the Gita. And it's there that we see that Vishnu, Narayan, Purusha, Isha, Brahman, all came to the world as Krishna. But we're led into that as a secret some minutes on in the conversation. In the beginning, Arjuna doesn't know Although if we read other parts of the Mahabharata, we know that Arjuna wasn't entirely ignorant of Krishna's position. But he remembers and then he forgets. So right throughout the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is asserting his identity as Vishnu, Narayan, Purusha, Isha. And there are so many verses. Let me just tell you. He's telling us that he has ikshana, or volition, which is very important. God is not. So, let's just see. Krishna says in 4:6 that he comes by his own will to this world. We come to this world not by our will, but by the force of cosmic swirling, karmic energies pushing us to take birth again. That's our unfortunate position. But Krishna comes to this world not by the pullings and pushings of material energy. Why? Because he is Isha, he's the Ishwara, he's in control of all of that. He comes of his own sweet ikshana, his own sweet will. So he's the only entity that is unbound or free. He has that Shakti. So in the Bhagavad Gita 9:11, of course, Krishna says, I am the imperishable supreme. All beings see me everywhere, but I'm not bound by them. So much, ye pieti, te disho loka pashanti mam avyayam. Everything there. He's conscious, he's intelligent, jnana kshetram prasidam. I am the knower, the consciousness that illuminates all living beings. Krishna is beautiful. And one may think, well, when we say that Krishna is beautiful, or when we say Vishnu is beautiful, is that in the eye of the beholder? And the Shastra says, no, Krishna's beauty is intrinsic. It's intrinsic. Even if you did not want to accept that Krishna was beautiful, still you would be forced to see the beauty of Krishna because it's intrinsic beauty. It's not up to your opinion. And so it's not just something that is perceived, but it's part of his divine attractiveness. Another important one is compassion. So in Bhagavad Gita we find that Krishna, the Lord, comes to deliver his devotees from distress and suffering. And it talks about love. We find Krishna's love as the primary thing that he is interested in sharing. And the divine love is not abstract. It's very personal between the divine and the individual soul. And the fact that Krishna comes to share that with others out of his compassion and his will. I appear millennium after millennium by my own volition. And what about this one? By me in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. All beings are in me, but I'm not in them. Yet everything created does not rest in me. I'm the maintainer of all beings. I'm everywhere. But I'm not a part of this cosmic manifestation, for myself is the very source of creation. This nature, material nature, is working under my direction, producing all moving and non-moving things, beings. By this cause, this manifestation is created again and again. And the famous one here, the so-called Chaturshloki of the Bhagavad Gita, the 4 verses which are the essence of the Gita. Essence of everything Krishna says is in these 4 verses. 10.8. I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. The wise who know this worship me with all their hearts. 10.9. The thoughts of my pure devotees dwell in me. Their lives are fully devoted to my service. They derive great satisfaction and bliss from always enlightening one another and conversing about me. And the last one. To those who are constantly devoted to serving me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. So Krishna now explains Bhakti. It goes on. It is very difficult to read the Bhagavad Gita without finding Krishna talking about himself as Brahman, Ishvara, Isha, Purusha, Vishnu, or Narayana. And we're glad that he does. Finally, 2 verses which are favorites of mine. And then we'll finish. Krishna says, I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. By all the Vedas, I am to be known. I am the compiler of the Vedanta, and I am the knower of the Vedas. Another one. The Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart and is directing the wanderings of all living entities who are seated as on a machine made of material energy. So I rest my case here that Krishna is revealing himself as Purusha, Isha, Brahman, Mahavishnu, Narayan. All of those epithets are met in Krishna in the one place. And we shall continue next week to talk about whether Krishna is ultimately personal or impersonal, because the doubt will remain. Thank you.